Let's try weaving. For those who follow me regularly, it probably is no surprise that I have decided to try yet another craft. I've been an admirer of woven art for some time, but only now did I decide to finally give it a go. Get cozy or craft alongside me as I try weaving for the very first time. To start out, I did make myself a cardboard weaving frame following a tutorial by The Weaving Loom. I will link it down below. Making my own frame to start was a great way to try this craft out without investing too much money before I knew if I liked it. Plus, you know how much I love creating things with cardboard. I picked up some cotton twine to use for my warp thread, and honestly I have no idea if this is a recommended material, but it worked just fine for this project. Obviously, I'm just a beginner, but I will try and share what I've learned so far. For example, the warp threads are the ones that run vertically on the frame, made out of the aforementioned cotton twine, whereas the weft threads run horizontally and will be made up of an array of other materials. I never ended up using any wool roving on this particular piece, but a crafty coworker of mine kindly gifted me this whole bag of fibers that they were not going to use, and I definitely need something made with this gorgeous multicolored roving. I watched several weaving videos before getting started, and even some during this video, so you'll see me playing with my mouse. And I want to share a channel that has tons and tons and tons of helpful weaving content, and that is Spruce and Linen. Again, it's linked below. Janelle, who is the brains behind the channel and the shop, is even a fellow Canadian. I just love that. The first row of stitching is a twining stitch using some fluffy white yarn. I don't know my yarns well enough to tell you much more about each yarn, other than they're what I had on hand, or they're really just pretty, and I picked them up. Before I get too far, I did insert a piece of cardboard between the warp threads and an alternating pattern to help create tension and also separate them to make my life easier when passing the needle through. Back to the twining stitch. Well, almost, because the first time I got the thread through, I decided after that I wanted to start up under the first warp, and I missed a stitch at the end. Looking back now, I may have actually done this first step incorrectly, but it's fine. That's how we learn. Anyways, once I pulled that thread through finally, it was time to turn this plain weave into a twining stitch by taking the needle under every second warp thread that has a weft overlapping it. As you can see here, it's probably easier to look at it than to hear me talk about it. And I did that all the way across. I followed the twining stitch with 3 rows of plain weave. Let's shout out this hair comb I had lying around. It worked so perfectly for this. You may have noticed in that one clip that I created an arch with the yarn before combing it down, and that's so the tension does not end up too tight. A key note here is to leave a decently long tail before and after you start or stop. Well, that's confusing. Just so that you can tuck it in easily at the end. Next step was to create a fringe. After getting an idea of how long I wanted the fringe to be and adding a little extra for trimming, I attached the yarn in sets of 2 using what's called a raya knot. This was so simple. Although I did end up moving where I had started them, and at the end I had 1 warp thread without any fringe. That I think was caused by a miscount I had when stringing the frame. No big deal, again, that's how we learn. Now we get into the meat of the weaving. Is that kind of gross? I don't know. For a majority of this piece, I used the plain weave stitch, I really tried to avoid getting overconfident with this first piece, but I will try things in the future. For now, we're just going to keep it simple. And I'm going to leave you here with the music and the sights of me weaving, just because, like I said, it's pretty therapeutic. So, again, be cozy, maybe craft along, find something. And I'm going to leave you, and I'll be right back. There was a point early on where I decided that the loose ends were really annoying me, and I utilized some binder clips to hold them all down. This yellow yarn was quite thin, so I doubled it up on the needle before weaving it on, which worked really well. This pink sparkly cord ended up sort of random, but I do like it in the end, even though I only have one patch of it. For this particular piece, I wanted something pretty natural and organic, I guess you could say, in shapes, so I didn't use a ton of straight lines. I had some trouble coming back, picking up where I left off, so to speak, because I couldn't tell where some of the stitches ended in the previous color. The yellow was definitely the hardest of the bunch to tell where it was. I think this was probably the reason why I ended up with a few holes, which you can see here in the shot. I will say, weaving could also be a really great scrap buster. The yellow and white yarn seen in this piece was a small scrap from coasters my mom made for me, and I'm definitely going to be busting into my fabric scraps to see if I can salvage any fabric to weave with. There's a piece I pinned by a creator called Fish Warp that I cannot shake from my head, and it looked like, well, I'll show it right here. It looks like a ton of different textures and materials were used. Now, wouldn't something like that be really perfect for my little crafter? I mean, come on. As you can see, I kept working my way up the piece, alternating colors and adding twining stitch, Ryan knot, one or two of those, along with the plain weave stitch. I finished it off with more of the fluffy white and a secure twining stitch before I got to the scariest part of this project, which was taking it off the frame. I feel like it was made easier by the cardboard because I could wiggle the tabs to free the thread, but it's still scary. Now, hindsight is 20/20 here because I definitely did not leave enough warp thread available on the ends to tie this piece off. I ended up having to tie the warp threads together in small knots and then struggle a little bit to hide the tails, which you will see in a minute. Look at these nice long tails on all the other pieces that made my life so much easier. I can't complain too much though because it did work out in the end. The second to last step was attaching the piece to a dowel, which I cut down to size. This particular dowel may have been too skinny for this piece, but it was what I had on hand. I really had no concept of how to attach this, but it ended up being very easy. Just simply stitching around it and in between where your warp threads were in the piece. Less is more, less is more, less is more. I had to keep reminding myself this while trimming all of my fringe. Although I do think replacing a set of yarn after the fact wouldn't be too hard, I definitely wanted to avoid that. Ben specifically requested for the bottom of the fringe to be cut in a V shape, even though I know it's pretty subtle. I did a variety of styles on the other fringe, the first one just straight across, the second one a little bit lopsided, and the final one in a little V shape. Now we're gonna hang it up. We're gonna see what it ended up looking like. I felt we needed some more art for this very spot in the bathroom, which I just want to know how our bathroom ended up as the best decorated room in the whole house. I am so happy with how this came together, and seriously, weaving is such a fun, relatively simple craft. I will certainly be trying some more, which you will likely see sprinkled across my social media, which reminds me, follow me on Instagram if you aren't already. My mom has requested one for herself with blues and greens, so that's up next. I hope you enjoyed this video, and of course, thank you so much for watching. I'm curious, have you ever tried weaving?